We've got some beautiful posters which match the T-shirts in 2 colours. Yeah. Really beautiful solidarity bag to support the Moog 4. There's been a zine that has been produced by Friends of Amu, which has got some really, really incredible research, which will tell you all about the links between the RAF spy flights, surveillance, refueling programs. Super thoroughly researched, thanks to also Code Pink and UK bases off Cyprus. Take a look. Help yourself to as many as you can. Please distribute them everywhere. We want people to understand what the campaign is about. And there's T-shirts. There's also an artwork which has been made by Dan for this event, which is a really beautiful print that he's done. There's also ceramics. There's loads of artwork upstairs, so take a look. Some photography as well. All donations will go towards the campaign. And that's all I've got to say.
Thank you. I think we're going to get started. Matt Kennard is running slightly late, so he's just going to join us and we're just going to continue. I'm Nida. I am one of the Brize Norton 5 loved ones. I'm sure everyone in this room, pretty much everyone, is aware when I say free the Brize Norton 5, what we mean. But for those who aren't, welcome to our campaign. Brize Norton 5 are 5 activists that were kidnapped by counter-terror police in June 2025 for an alleged connection to the direct action at RAF Brize Norton in Oxfordshire that took place on the 20th of June 2025. 2 activists broke into an RAF base on scooters. They then spray painted 2 warplanes. These planes were part of a fleet of RAF Voyager planes, which go and refuel planes mid-strike. Soon after, 5 people were arrested and have been consistently denied bail. Then, after that, the case was used as a reference for prescribing Palestine action. The prisoners' names are Umar, Dan, John, Louis, and Amu. They have been in prison for 10 months now. They are charged under the National Security Act, and that is unprecedented. They are the first ever activists to have ever been charged under the charge, and with terror links. 4 out of the 5 prisoners were on a hunger strike. Umar participated in a thirst strike too. And we really saw the discourse around Israeli arms lobby being very deeply embedded in this government and this cabinet and previous cabinet be reactivated through the hunger strikes. I very much look forward to talk about all of this with our panelists. So please welcome Dr. Asim Qureshi, who is Please welcome Dr. Asim Qureshi, who's with Cage International. They have a pedigree of fighting against state repression, challenging the war on terror. And they were also, they're supportive of the Fulton 24 prisoners, and they're now supporting the Brize Norton 5 campaign. Welcome Hamza Yusuf from Declassified UK, who is a Palestinian journalist. And T, who is a liberated Fulton prisoner. I feel such an honor introducing her. She was on a hunger strike for 63 days, fighting for an eventual shutdown of Elbit systems, which I hope that we see in our lifetime. So, thank you so much for joining us. I guess before we start, T has written something for the Brize Norton 5 that she's going to read out now. Is that okay?
Yeah, and just to clarify, I did 56 days in the second hunger strike. Cameron, I believe, did 63, so I don't want to take his track record. So, I want to start by telling you about 5 young people who have been imprisoned by Putin's government, accused of spray painting a military aircraft to protest Russia's war crimes in Ukraine. Appalled by videos of dismembered children, they were moved to action. They have spent 10 months languishing behind bars, and one of them, a 22-year-old, has lost the ability to walk and is carried around by other prisoners. The prison is refusing him a wheelchair. He was kept in hospital for 12 days incommunicado. His mother and lawyers asked for proof of life. They were ignored. Few people in the country know about them, but they exist as proof of Russia's authoritarian regime. Their mail is blocked, they are punished for praying out loud, and they went on a near-death hunger strike in a media blackout. Now, replace the words Russia with UK, Putin with Keir Starmer, Ukraine with Gaza. These 5 people are John, Amu, Dan, Louis, and Umar of the Brize Norton 5. It was June 20th when I first heard about the case. I was sitting in my cell in HMP Bronzefield watching the news as a figure casually scooted across RAF Brize Norton on my screen and spray painted 2 aircrafts. I later learnt that these were Airbus Voyagers used for air-to-air refueling of Israeli striker jets. These were the best moments in prison, knowing that the Palestinians had not been forgotten and the struggle to disrupt the arms trade in the UK continued, all in despite of the government's authoritarian crackdown on dissent. The Brize Norton 5 are accused of taking action at the point when no one else was willing to face reality. Now the line has shifted and hundreds are blocking these same RAF bases they stand accused of disrupting. Supporting the Brize Norton 5 isn't just about supporting these 5 individuals. It's about supporting the right of a child to life. It's about taking that step to stand in front of the bullet before it hits the child, rather than tending to their wounds afterwards. As of July 2025, RAF Brize Norton hosted Israeli Ream jets 9 times, using the base to refuel on the way back from picking up US weapons for transport to Israel. When the action happened, the media published headlines calling it a disgraceful act, a grotesque breach of national security. Now, these same RAF bases are being used as US proxies to attack Iran and conduct further surveillance missions for Israel. So I leave it up to you to ask, who was acting in the interests of national security? 5 people not willing to accept the status quo of genocide, or Keir Starmer's government locking them up, locking them away? Will you go to the source and stop that bullet? Since the Brize Norton 5 have been in prison, they have passed the mantle on to us, and we must continue their struggle. The genocide is ongoing, and our collective responsibilities are not diminishing. They are increasing daily. Each life in Iran, in Lebanon, in Palestine has a soul behind it. The Brize Norton 5 are being held under charges tied to national security. The same laws have been used against anyone opposed to British imperialism, from the Prevention of Terrorism 1989 Act used to kill the Irish nationalist movement to the current counter-terrorism measures used against activists holding cardboard signs. Their charges have nothing to do with national security or paint damage. They are being punished for exposing the extent of British involvement in genocide. The legal system does not act in the British interest when they rule against an F-35 arms embargo. Keir Starmer's government does not act in our interest when they are willing to let its own citizens on hunger strike die to protect their working relations with the arms trade. Yvette Cooper does not act in our interest when the Home Office meets with representatives of Elbit Systems. The Brize Norton 5 were acting for national security against those with interests in killing children. The government has shown they are willing to protect Israel and Elbit with the full force of the national security law, but as the public, we are being presented with a choice, an opportunity. Do we want a society made up of people accused of trying to stop a genocide, or do we want to continue the current status quo of the Epstein ruling class who tells you who to consider a terrorist? I ask you one question. How can we terrorize the machine only the devil could have made?
Thank you, T. Thank you so much. I also wanted to remind everyone here that this event is being live streamed, and so, yeah, whatever you say will be live. That's all. So maybe watch what you say. Right, I think as we're starting, I wanted to ask both of our panelists here the same question, and that is, how crucial do you both think this, action that took place at RAF Brize Norton is in exposing the wider ecosystem between the Zionist entity and Britain? Hamza, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important because it's forcing us to have a conversation that our politicians, our establishment, the MOD, the entire political establishment don't really want to be having. And it's really brought into sharp focus the reality about not just Britain, not just its role, but its historic role in upholding and sustaining the imperial war machine. And we've, as I'm sure we'll discuss, the mainstream media plays an indispensable role in obscuring the reality. The politicians refuse to answer any questions, declassified countless doorstops. Huge shout out to Phil Miller, the editor, when he stopped John Healey, when he stopped the Chief Admiral of the Defence Staff. They just refused to deviate from the script. They refused to give any answers. They wanted it to be a smokescreen. They wanted to uphold the smokescreen. And the bottom line is that conversations are now being forced to have. They'd rather keep it under wraps. They'd rather that the public isn't aware about the reality. Just like the media covered up the genocide and the systematic slaughter in Gaza, this is now on a different level. They want to make sure that the reality, the public is insulated from the role that Britain is playing. And it goes beyond just one political party, one figure. They're all in on it, from the Labour Party to the Lib Dems, across the board. And there's just a reluctance to have a conversation. But as a result, the action that we're talking about here has forced almost an awakening for people. It's forced people to reconcile with the reality. And it's an uncomfortable conversation for politicians and the media to be engaging in. And that's ultimately that's why it's very important.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hamza. But I can take it from a slightly different perspective, which is more related to us and who we are and what our movement is about. I think what, Palestine Action before its prescription, what all the actionists, Filton, Moog, obviously the Brize Norton 5, what they have done is crack open a part of our activist community that I think had been somewhat out of reach for a while. And that's very much because of the genocide. Like it's a huge spiritual violence that, and psychological violence that all of us have had to endure for the last 2.5 years, as we've seen these images of all of these men, women, and children having their lives absolutely decimated by this horrible war machine, and knowing full well that our governments are not just complicit, because I think complicit doesn't do enough work to really capture the degree to which they are actively involved in that killing. What we have with direct action is a seismic shift in our understanding of what our role is. What we have fully understood, I think, and a lot of credit has to go to Richard and Huda in particular, is this idea that there are these entire streams of these tendrils of violence that connect to carry out that killing in the end. And the UK is not a supplier, it is directly involved, and therefore to create a fissure between here and the Zionist occupation forces is a necessary part of stopping this violence from taking place. And that's what this movement has done. It has helped us to recalibrate our understanding of how it is that we're able to act, to resist, to really be able to confront this machinery. And what they thought, of course, is that prescription was going to be the end of the matter, because they've done this. Just look at the colonial record. You can go as far back as you like. Wherever there is imperialism and there is repression that takes place, they always want to silence and use laws in order to stop any effective resistance. And that's exactly what's happening here. But of course, what is interesting is that you have thousands of people who said to themselves, well, actually, no, this is wrong. And what we're going to do is we're going to allow ourselves to be arrested in order to make manifest how ridiculous this entire thing is. And it's so fascinating for me. Like, I think maybe 10 years ago, I wrote a paper where I talked about how counterterrorism legislation, its racial violence would never be undone until white people were willing to put themselves between Muslim bodies and terrorism laws. And actually, I've been so amazed and impressed to see the Defend Our Juries movement come together in order to achieve that. And so when we're talking about the significance of Brize Norton, we have to place it with a constellation of actions that are taking place concurrently. And the trials are a part of that ecosystem. And the Filton heroes, they really helped to make that manifest to us, that actually we're not just fighting at the point of resistance, we're also fighting in the courtroom, and we're fighting in the media. It's where groups like Unclassified, Declassified come in extremely handy, because they are the ones who are helping to expose the things that no one else is willing to talk about. So as long as we see Brize Norton as part of that ecosystem, then we have a chance of really building this movement further. Thank you.
Late to the party for him, Matt. No worries about it. Matt is an author, co-founder of Declassified UK, Palestine Deep Dive, and has extensively reported on the spy planes program. So he is particularly quite significant for the Brize Norton 5 campaign. I started off with a question that I asked all the panelists that I want to kind of relate to you. How do you think that the direct action that took place at RAF Brize Norton, how crucial do you think it is to exposing the wider ecosystem between the Zionist entity and Britain?
Sorry.
It's okay.
No, it's all right.
Are you sure?
Yeah. I'm just a bit, I don't know. It's Sunday. Well, I think it's hugely significant, which is why you see the government repression, because this is Britain is a co-sponsor of the genocide, but also has been a co-sponsor of the torture of Palestinians for over 100 years. It all started in this city with the Balfour Declaration, and pretty much from that point onwards, they've participated in the torture of and the deconstruction of Palestine and the imposition of this settler colony on top. So, but with the genocide, what was quite interesting is that Hamza and colleagues at Declassified, basically, we were the only ones really showing the UK role. And the UK role is not complicity. This is what I've been saying for ages, but it's worth repeating, is that even parts of the left, they still use, and the pro-Palestine movement, they use the word complicity, which sounds like a passive thing. I mean, they are complicit as well. But when you are, and why I focus so much on the spy planes is that I think that's the clearest evidence that it crossed way over the line to participation. Because if you're sending spy planes over Gaza, which the UK government were doing for nearly 2 years, nearly daily as well, for 6 hours, and passing that intelligence to the Israeli military in real time, which is what we found out later they were doing, that is not complicity. That is, you're a participant in that. Every legal expert says the same. A court of law would say the same. And it's a really, there's no more serious crime that a state can commit than genocide. And we participated in it. And it's just fascinating and disgusting how the mainstream media didn't cover it at all. So I was banging my head against the wall for a year on this story, and then it all kind of changed. So for the whole time I was reporting, I was like, all I want to get is what this spy plane is doing over Gaza, because on the flight tracking websites you could see it leaving RAF at Kretiri, which is the colony that Britain retains on Cyprus, and about halfway to Gaza it would turn off its transponder, so we never knew what it was doing over Gaza. And then we found one time this plane going around the Khan Yunis area, and then clicked on it, and it had come from RAF at Kretiri. Interestingly, it wasn't a British military plane. So we were like, wow, this is interesting. So myself and a very good journalist called Abdullah Farouk published a story on Palestine Deep Dive. And at that point, we didn't know who had contracted that plane. In fact, the British military wasn't one of the likely people, in my opinion, because we had 8 of these planes. They've been doing it for 2 years. Why would you suddenly contract it out? So I thought maybe it will be like the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or maybe the Americans or the Israelis, who knew? And then, because we had that image of what the plane was doing over Gaza, which the government had tried its hardest and successfully managed to keep secret, that changed the whole story. And that's when the mainstream media finally got involved. And it shows the power of when the mainstream media does get involved, because the Times, which followed up on it, had sources within the Ministry of Defence. So instantly there was 2 stories, very important stories, that Larissa Brown at the Times published. And she asked her sources inside the Ministry of Defence, okay, so who is the contractor? And they said, oh, it's the British military. So we knew that information. They also found out, so interestingly, again, this is a crime scene we're talking about. So the government, whenever they were asked, where's this information going from these spy flights, they always said to the relevant authorities. They would never specify what those relevant authorities were. Of course they wouldn't, because it was the Israeli military. We kind of guessed it was, but we couldn't say that in any articles because we didn't have the solid information. So anyway, she found out from her MOD source that it was going to the Israeli military, and not only that, it was going in real time. So the plane was going around Gaza, and that information was being sent to the ground in Israel in real time. So incredible. And then it was covered in The Guardian. It was covered in the Israeli press. And again, this is why I think the media is complicit, because they could have done that a year and a half ago. They could have done that right at the start. And then everyone would have known about it. We would have had all the information. It just took one journalist to call up her contacts. And then pressure would have built on the government to do something to stop it, and we could have stopped the participation. So the journalists that have dropped the ball on this topic are complicit in the genocide, in my opinion. And the government itself, including the previous Sunak government and the Starmer one, are not complicit, they're participants. So we really need to push for them to get. It's an open and shut case at The Hague. Open and shut. If you've indicted Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, his former defense minister, for these crimes, if you're collecting intelligence and giving it to them in real time, then you are definitely open to being prosecuted as well. So, and people kind of flinch when you say that, because they can't. Because it's so ingrained in us that these legal institutions are only for official enemies. You can't ever hold our own politicians accountable. But I think when they indicted Netanyahu and Gallant, that did change consciousness a bit and did open the window for us to push harder for our own politicians. Because part of the reason they get away with what they have done for forever is because there's complete impunity for them. There's not been one Western politician ever indicted for a war crime. And think of how much of the world they've messed up, and that's, I was going to say a more rude word, but they've destroyed large, especially the Middle East, West Asia. It's Iraq, Afghanistan, every country, Syria, Libya, plus all the Gulf states which live under brutal Western-backed dictatorships. So we're in a new world now. I think Gaza has opened the eyes of the world and changed consciousness, and I think that mainly because I don't do as many events now, but I was doing regular during the genocide, and people keep coming up to me, older people as well, and being like, I've spent my whole life believing that we are the good guys and believing all the stuff you read in The Guardian and the Daily Telegraph and whatever it is, and watching for 2 years their government and their politicians, and not only that, bipartisan, it was Labour and Tory, get up and defend it, has shocked them to their core. Because there's no arguing with what happened in Gaza. Everyone knows. We've seen the images. We saw it for 2 years. The most horrendous, barbaric stuff we've ever seen. And obviously our politicians knew, and they didn't do anything because they're scum. Effectively, they are scum. They're scum. They're scum. They're immoral, amoral scum. And they've got to their position because of that, because power systems promote people who are willing to do what they're told. And Keir Starmer's the perfect example of that. But that leads me on to finish with the Palestine Action, which when you have a population which is awakened in a way, I think, and not just here, globally, and you have a ruling class which is at odds with them, which is what we have, and the propaganda that they put out through their channels, the mainstream media, doesn't work anymore, you can't keep control in the same way. So you have to revert to a more serious measures, which they don't want to do, but they have to when the crisis hits. And that's what we're seeing now. You know, unprecedented actions to suppress the pro-Palestine movement, unprecedented propaganda as well. You know, all that rubbish about the hate marches and all that stuff. But prescribing Palestine action is a show of strength, but it's a sign of weakness. And they did it, and it's been a disaster for them. You know, many brave people have come out and put up placards which say, I oppose genocide, I support Palestine action, and then they'd get arrested, and then other people would go up to policemen and say, I support genocide, and they'd be like, okay, that's fine. So we live in I think we live in a new world, and it doesn't just go for Palestine. I think Palestine is the trigger, but no one looks and thinks, okay, I've been lied to about Israel, Palestine forever, and then stops there. They start saying, well, if they've lied to me about that, they've lied to me about everything else. And yes, they have. So they're looking at the US power, which is, again, Israel is a colony of the US, effectively. It couldn't exist for a week or do what it does for a week in terms of the violence it metes out without the US. And people, and it's so heavily propagandized, the American empire. In fact, you can't even call it an American empire. And that's changed a bit as well. Now people understand that the US isn't this sort of neutral or beneficent superpower. It's actually a brutal empire which seeks domination and exploitation of resources all around the world, and will do what Israel did to Gaza in Cambodia and Vietnam. They were destroyed in a similar way. Palestine Action have been integral to that awakening, I think, because they've shown the contradictions which are suppressed in normal times through their bravery. They have, and particularly Brize Norton, because when they allegedly did their action at Brize Norton in June, one of the main pushback techniques of the media and the sort of commentariat was to say this base has nothing to do with the genocide, or they wouldn't use the word genocide, but this has nothing to do with the conflict in Gaza, they'd say. But it's obviously integral, and we know that because we did a story, myself and Abdullah Farouk again, about how 9 Israeli Air Force planes had secretly landed at Brize Norton during the Starmer administration. And I say secret because the government wouldn't reveal it. There was parliamentary questions put down, and they said we don't comment on allies' movements on our bases. So we found that out, and those planes, Ream aerial refueling planes, we'd found the ones that had landed in the UK had been over Gaza in the days before, refueling fighter jets which were bombing civilian targets. And there was a Bet Lahia, we found one specific one, a massacre that had happened when this plane was going over it. So Brize Norton is deeply implicated. And then, of course, I mean, it's so mad, the presentation of that action, because what they're alleged to have done is to spray a bit of red paint on a couple of planes. And then because the pushback was so hard in terms of the prescription, they had to propagandize or present this as this awful thing. So they said, well, it's caused £30 million worth of damage, which was then revised down to 7 million. And then even that, and then John McAvoy, who's at Declassified UK, he's done a lot of good work on this, and he found that the 2 planes which were sprayed, which firstly the UK military said we don't have any estimate to give you on how much it cost, and then he found that the 2 planes were in the sky on operations within 3 weeks. So I don't know how even £7 million worth of damage from a bit of red paint. And interestingly, he found out as well that those planes aren't even owned by us, or by the UK taxpayer. They're owned by a private company called Air Tanker Limited, which is where that 7 million figure came from. And obviously they've got an interest in the arms trade and stuff. So, but I think the narrative has been lost by the forces of evil in the British government and the Zionists, and they are on the back foot, really. I know it's sick to talk of successes in the face of what we've witnessed. because it's just horrendous. The costs have been way too high, but there definitely has been a shift. And I'll finish with this. Saeed, who was previously spokesperson for Palestine Action, he was talking about how he did one action and then he was in the middle of it, and he was looking at the police, and he just realized they were scared of them. And roles have been reversed, and it's liberating when you know that they're on the back foot, not us. They're on the back foot. They're the ones that are having to do unprecedented actions, which is messing up their own government. I mean, it's a disaster for the Labour government. It's like akin to the poll tax, which was a disaster for the Thatcher. So we got to push forward, because we're not going to get this opportunity again. And you know, Palestinians have been waiting for 80 years since the creation of the settler colony, but before that as well, for the world to really get on their side, because they don't have anyone. They don't have any institutions. The Zionists have made sure they can't get a state. They don't have any constituency within international institutions. They're erased from the media. All they have is us. They've got the global population, and they're on their side, and we're vocal, but it's important that we use that power, and we're brave, because at the end of the day, if we're not brave now, we'll never be brave.
Thank you, Matt. That was such a good start to this conversation. Hamza, you work for Declassified UK, and they have also extensively reported, as Matt said, John has also reported on the spy planes program. Phil has, doorstepped the Air Force commander and asked about the Israeli Air Force. But what Declassified UK have repeatedly found, which obviously, I mean, every journalist that wants to cover this has found, is that Ministry of Defense has all the numbers and the figures, but they have repeatedly not reported on it, and have cited national security reasons for this. They have refused parliamentary questions on it, although they weren't that frequent. What role do you think that the media has to play in kind of, I guess, holding our government and our tax money accountable?
Yeah, before getting to that, I just want to reiterate something what you just mentioned. They're doing it right now as well, where there's West Streeton was on LBC the other week, and then he was asked about the war on Iran, and he said Keir Starmer's vindicated in not getting involved. There's footage of bombs being loaded at RAF Lakenheath. There's footage of and evidence of the refueling jets. But again, the media's not asking these questions. Like Ed Davies, same thing. He came on and he said, I don't always agree with Starmer, but he made a great decision not to get involved. They are involved, but the media's not pushing back, because, to answer your question, they're all in it together. Britain understands that there's a settled understanding about Britain's position. It's strategic subordinates, right? So the decisions, everybody has different ideas. Who make, is it the chicken or the egg? Is it Israel? Is it Washington? Wherever the decision comes from, London follows. So their responsibility is not to question, it's not to challenge, it's to carry out. And the amount of time that we've put to the MOD, and they just give the same answers, they obscure. I remember we did an investigation. One element which kind of is understated is the torture based on Israeli intel. Sorry, the Israeli intel that's derived from torture of Palestinians in Gaza. And some of the paths charted by the spy flights in Gaza are as a result of the torture of Palestinians in Gaza. Now, when we put this to the MOD, they said, it's hostage retrieval operations. We spoke to Palestinians who have been tortured in Gaza. We spoke to one of them who talked about a dog's room, where you are tortured severely and then they throw you into the room and just let they unleash the dogs on you. One of the Palestinian lawyer in Gaza who spoke to us, he said one of the soldiers asked, he basically, you're in a position of weakness, so he just pleaded, and he said, look, I'm really hurt. I'm like, this is really bad. And he said, where is it hurting? And he said, oh, my arm. And he snapped his arm. And a lot of the time, they're forced to confess. They're forced to say that there's tunnels in X, Y, and Z. They're forced to say, look, this hospital and that area, etc. And that intel is often used when Israel and Britain are corroborating. That's the intel where it's coming from. We put this to the MOD, and it just gave a standard response. They just said, we can't comment on that. We're only focused on hostage retrieval operations. And that's obviously not the case. And it goes back to the fundamental point that the media is there to spin, it's there to conceal, it's not there to inform. and you look at, you mentioned the Times, in October 2025, I think they reported that the spy missions are stopping. They just reported as if they've reported it the whole time that they're ongoing, and they said, yeah, a few hundred flights are now stopping. But they didn't report it from the beginning. I remember being in Parliament and asking Richard Burgess, who's head of BBC, and this was on the release of the report by the Centre for Media Monitoring, and I asked him, like, how come the BBC don't report on the spy flights? And he goes, sarcastically goes, oh, well, congratulations on the work you're doing on this, but I wouldn't really overstate the importance of Britain in this. You know, this is a US operation. And that's the thing, they're given scripts and they're ultimately being told to regurgitate uncritically. And that's the role that the media plays. They're not there to inform. And there's so many instances where you look at David Lammy, was on Radio 4 in July 2020, last summer. And they asked him about these spy flights, and he said, we would never do that. There was no way that we could offer intel to the Israelis. And they're allowed to answer. Nobody challenges it, because obviously the presenter knows, everybody knows, but it's a case of keeping it under wraps, and that's the reality of the media, and that's why I completely agree with what Matt said. The media's complicit in a way. They are participants because they've covered the crimes. They've allowed this smokescreen to be built up about the role of Britain in this, and the amount of journalists. And I go back to it. The mention of the spy flight is minimal within mainstream media. And if you take that alongside the concealing of war crimes, the laundering and spinning of Israel's genocide, these journalists have taken a decision. This is a conscious choice. And it takes unpacking certain habits. And I go back to it all the time, The Guardian. People need to stop reading The Guardian, because The Guardian is, unless you run out of toilet paper, there is no reason there is no reason to be purchasing The Guardian, to be reading The Guardian. At the end of the day, they've laundered crimes. They've given in to the pressures from above, and even small things like they used to keep running the Hamas-run health ministry in their reporting until Guardian staff from within gave them a comprehensive spreadsheet and said, look how many times you've used this, look how many times you've regurgitated Israeli talking points. Only from pressure from good, decent journalists who obviously have to make a living from within did that line change, and they're still doing it now. They put just to deviate a little bit, sorry, they put a video of an entire residential building being flattened in Lebanon the other day, and then the caption is Israel strikes on Hezbollah. An entire residential building flattened, and they're still regurgitating these same methods to launder war crimes. So the media's role in this, in concealing the reality, in making sure people don't connect the dots, has been indispensable, and they just ignore the work of Palestine Deep Dive, of Middle East Style, of Declassified, because it does exist. The material is out there about the spy flights, about the depth of it. And just to end on one point, the media covers it, and the politicians just continue to pretend. A few weeks ago was the anniversary of the massacre of the World Central Kitchen workers, which was April the 1st. And Hamish Faulkner put out a statement, and he said, Britain is pursuing all methods to try and achieve and obtain justice for these people. There is footage from a spy flight in the air in the moment that killing happened. So they have the footage, and he's telling people, do you know what? We're going to try everything. Well, if you just release the footage, people would know what happened, and it would offer some sense of liberation for the family members who have been pleading with the government to release that footage, but they refuse. But they're just taking everyone on a ride. And like I said, it's Peter O'Bourne calls it a cross-party cartel, and that's what it is. They're ruling on it, and the media plays an indispensable role in sustaining it so that people don't connect the dots about the reality. So the MOD, they can rely on the BBC, The Guardian and co, and the politicians are singing from the same hymn sheet as well.
Yeah, go for it.
Just wanted to add something because, Hamza, that was a great analysis of an overview, but there is a specific mechanism as well which shows how captured our media is on the UK military and intelligence services, which is the DNOS Committee. So-called DNOS, changed its name now, to try and get away from the bad press that it got for the previous one. But it's kind of unique in the so-called democratic world because so I'll explain what it is in a minute, but I'll say how it works in the United States. Obviously, the United States does not have good national security reporting in the mainstream. If you read CNN, it's just literally press releases from the Pentagon or the CIA or whatever it is. But they do it but they do it in private, so they'll meet with the CIA or the Pentagon and just take their lines. But in the UK, there's a formal group that meets every 6 months at the Ministry of Defence, which is a collection of senior journalists from The Guardian has been on it, the deputy editor was on it from 2014 to 2018, The Times, and they basically discuss what can and can't be published. So journalists who are meant to be covering and exposing the reality for us of what the military and intelligence are doing, are collaborating with the people who are carrying out the crimes about what they can and can't publish. And in the case of Gaza, it became very serious because there was a D-notice sent out on October 28th. And they're meant to be secret, or they're confidential. They're sent out to all editors, right? So every editor in the UK will get it, of a newspaper or a magazine or whatever it is. And it says at the top, confidential, do not publish on social media or anywhere. So obviously I got hold of it and published it, but if you look into it, it's actually really broad. So it was sent out in October 28th when we knew that SAS, which is the completely secret special forces unit of the UK military, was sent to Cyprus for quote-unquote Gaza operations. That was a story in The Sun that was leaked. They sent out this D-notice on October 28th. They said, do not publish any information about so-called counter-terrorism operations or intelligence operations or special forces operations in the Middle East. And it was broad, or actually it didn't even specify. It said any Ministry of Defense unit involved in those things. So, and from that day forward, from October 28th to now, we don't know a single thing about what the SAS have been doing and were doing in Gaza. Now, it's likely that they definitely, probably on some of these transport planes that were going from RAF Akrotiri to Israel, but we don't know. And then, there's another part of it as well, which is that in June 2024, the New York Times, of all places, actually published a very good investigation where they said a British spy unit was sent to Israel, so was inside Israel early in the genocide. That was in the New York Times, sourced to Israeli military officials. Not a single word about that spy team has ever appeared in the UK media, which is insane because they ignore us and declassified or deep dive or whatever it is. But when it's in the New York Times, which is for some reason seen as one of the most respected newspapers in the world, but you would think that there would be pressure on the Guardian. And again, it goes to what I was saying before. This is the most serious crime a government commit, and we have people inside who are providing, and this is the quote from the Israeli military official, providing information we cannot collect, we being the Israelis, on our own. It's madness. It's madness. The media has never been as exposed as it has been by Gaza. It's literally, we don't have a media, we have a propaganda system, and unfortunately we have a propaganda system which works in the service of the UK establishment, but very clearly in the service of the Zionist entity as well.
Thank you, Hamza and Matt. I have a question for Dr. Asim. You've done a lot of work around weaponization and misuse of terror legislation. You're also a big advocate of scrapping it. However, in this case, although we have terror links, there's also this aspect of the National Security Act, and a lot of the lawyers that I'm even speaking to or trying to get information of this act aren't familiar with it. And so could you talk to us a little bit about, the significance of them being charged under this act?
Yeah, thank you. I think in many ways this kind of reflects what Matt and Hamza have been saying about stenographers that we have within the British press. So we have the National Security Act of 2023, which provides a whole host of provisions in relation to how we keep this country ostensibly safe. But the significance of that act, as opposed to other counterterrorism legislation we've had in the past, is that its focus is on this idea of foreign states, foreign bodies, foreign entities. So it's trying to create an infrastructure, so an architecture on top of the counterterrorism architecture that we already have, which of course was built on an architecture of racist policing, right? So we've got like layers upon layers of violence that take place. Now, this National Security Act builds on top of the global war on terror and all of the legislation and policies that came in that period of time. And what this really is, ultimately, if we want to boil it down to something that's understandable for some of us who perhaps caught the tail end, I'm exposing at my age here, of the Cold War, right? But it is a return to those policies, which is this idea that foreign entities and foreign interests should be treated as suspicious and should be criminalized in whatever way that they can. So it's not, the process of criminalization isn't simply somebody being arrested. It is every single element of the way that you are interacted with by the state, where they believe that there is some kind of suspicious behavior. So for example, just your name being on a database is a form of criminalization, because an assessment is being made about you that deems, for instance, that your name should exist on the domestic extremism database, just as one instance, right? There is very little oversight in terms of how this happens. Now, the act itself, what it's trying to do is trying to say, well, there are all of these foreign threats, existential threats that we are facing as a society, and therefore we need to nip those threats in the bud. You know, these two are particularly problematic because they're journalists, right? And journalists have a basic function, which is to bring out and evident the things that people do not know about, right? It's kind of the function of their work, if you're not a stenographer who just replicates press releases from the government. Now, you know, they've talked about publishing leaked material. If the government was to turn around and say, well, actually, we think that the publication of that leaked material is in the interests of a foreign government or a foreign entity, then they could be prosecuted under the National Security Act. That is its function. We have to understand the function of this legislation is to inhibit the movement of information. That is its essence. And that happens at so many different levels. You know, you have this element within the act called the foreign power condition, which is very, very, very broad. But that could apply to lobbying. It could apply to campaigning. It could even apply to academic research, right? So academic research is supposed to be this kind of like holy cow of research. But nothing under this act is secure from the accusation that you are acting in the interests of a foreign government or a foreign entity. Now, a lot of this, of course, kind of operates, and purposely so, in quite an amorphous space. You know, and because all of it's political, and it's about how you understand how the political operates with the everyday. Does holding up a placard indicate your support for a foreign entity? Does it indicate that you somehow are in support or providing aid to a foreign government? This is why all of this is so problematic. The Act also specifically prohibits certain places from ever being campaigned against, such as military infrastructure. And we see this, of course, with the Brize Norton case now, where they brought the national security element in because they're saying, well, an RAF base is a protected place. It's a protected space for national security reasons, okay? But of course, our job is to collectively make the argument that, you know, my background's international law, and within that schema, however problematic and however colonial that schema is, there is a hierarchy of norms. And there is a type of norm, right, that is called jus cogens, right? It is a very, very high status. It means that even if you don't have a piece of legislation, even if you don't have an international treaty, you cannot breach that norm. And the highest norm is called a peremptory norm. Genocide is a peremptory norm of international law. That means you don't require any signatures to a treaty. You don't require any bilateral or multilateral treaties to give it effect. You don't require a domestic piece of legislation to say that genocide is wrong. It is wrong by virtue of this norm's existence. And our job is to highlight how all of the things that we are doing are in service of ensuring that that peremptory norm is never breached. Now, what they're saying is actually the stuff that we do within the state, it can breach that peremptory norm, and it should be protected from public view because it's a national security threat for that information to be released. This is the oldest colonial tactic. You look at, honestly, any period of colonial repression where massacres took place. Look at the Amritsar massacre, look at Mau Mau, look at any period in colonial history, read about it, and one of the first things that they do is they bring in a piece of anti-sedition legislation, counter-terrorism legislation, and always accompanied with this is immediately a block on the travel of information. Because what they're trying to say is that that information, if it's released, is a national security threat, because what are they worried about? If people found out what we really did, there would be hell to pay. That is its function. We have to make that function evident to the rest of society, that this legislation is always used to mask their ill behavior, to mask the criminal things that they do on the earth. And we don't want to wait 70 years before something becomes declassified so that someone can stand up later and say, oh, that was a mistake, because everyone is dead by that point, right? That is, and so we have to understand how this legislation is functioning. This year, to wrap up a bit, they released the National Security Strategy of 2025, which is supposed to build further on top of that architecture. What they're using is something called serious crime prevention orders. Now, in the context of the war on terror, I worked a lot on something called control orders back in the early 2000s, which turned into something called these terrorism prevention investigation measures. Now they've got these special serious crime prevention orders, which build on top of that. And what do they do with these things? They do stuff like take your passport away from you. They say, oh, we think that you are a problematic individual. We don't have a criminal case against you, so what we're going to do is we're going to move you to a different part of the country, and we're going to isolate you, and you can't see anybody except via our approval. They can bar you from leaving the country. They can bar you from returning into the country. In kind of other circumstances, we've even seen people have their citizenships removed. And this is how this operates. Now you may say, well, how can they get away with that? Right? That's the question. Like, surely there must be a trial. There is no trial with administrative orders. Okay, that is the most important part of this. It is an arbitrary decision that is made by the Home Secretary. You receive the letter to say, we believe that you're no longer conducive to the public good, or we believe that you're working on behalf of a foreign entity. We believe that you are an Islamist extremist. These are the things that are always written on this letter that I've seen many, many times. So that's it. Like, your citizenship's removed. You've been excluded from your home and sent to a different part of the country and away from your support network. You're barred from going to protests. You have your passport removed. How do you challenge that? You say, well, this is outrageous. I have to challenge this. And then you're like, okay, like, how do you go about doing this? They say, oh, well, don't worry. We're a country that's fair and just. You can go to the High Court and make an appeal against this, which takes about 2 years to finally get around to. But they say, except this is a national security case. So we're going to have to present the evidence against you in secret because of national security concerns. What does that mean as a practicality? It means neither you, as the appellant, nor your lawyers are permitted to see the evidence against you. Right? That is how this functions. You are appointed a special advocate who you are permitted to speak to before they hear the secret evidence, but once they hear the secret evidence, they are not permitted to speak to you again. So once they hear the evidence, they can't come to you and confer, oh, I heard something like batshit crazy about you, right? Like, can we talk about this, please? No. They have to represent you to the best of their ability, right? Which is actually one of the reasons why we have a problem with the whole process and we don't think it should be used. But this is the environment. This is the legal environment in which we have to now operate, and it is an infrastructure that we have to call for the full dismantling of. It's not okay for us to now work within these conditions of this counterterrorism regime and this national security regime. We can't simply just keep on okaying it and trying to work our way throughout the system. We have to keep on challenging it and challenging its existence, because it impinges on every single element of our campaigning life. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question for you. I guess speaking from the perspective of courts and I guess charges, what does terror links do to a case? What are the consequences of that?
For who do you mean? For the defendants themselves, or for any of us?
I guess as a conceptually, what does a terror link even mean?
Yeah, I mean, again, this all operates, like I mentioned, in the amorphous, and purposely so. So many of these designations are so political. We're seeing a whole series of Section 12 and Section 13 offences. You got Sarah from the SOAS too, right, who gives a speech the day after, or a couple of days after October the 7th, where she's talking about the resistance, and they charge her with the Section 12 offence, which is an expression of support for a prescribed organisation. So they're making the claim in this circumstance that, you know, we believe that you're supporting Hamas. Now, those of us who haven't had a lobotomy understand that actually, you know, you can't actually make that claim because the legislation is supposed to require either a direct or a reckless, you know, expression of support directly for that group. Are they then telling us from a state level that actually, you know, we are going to inform you about what the resistance means? And that's what the case ultimately comes down to. You know, and this is how they operate. Look at Marie Hussein's case, right? She holds a placard up of Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman as coconuts, depicting them as coconuts, no words written, right? Hilarious placard. You know, so politically profound in what it's trying to convey. And they literally, and I remember saying to Maria, you know, we've known each other since we were children. I remember saying to her right from the start that there's no way they're going to ever charge you. Okay, and then we got charged. I'm like, there's no way they're going to ever try this case. Like, even up until the day before, I'm saying they're going to drop this case because it's so stupid. But they are so insistent upon using taxpayer money to control the space of what we can and cannot say. And so they literally spend all of this money to try and set a record through the prosecution of her, to say that, well, actually, we're the ones who will decide what is and isn't racist. And so they had a white barrister up against Augustus John and Gargi Bhattacharya, two of the most senior scholars of race in this country, right? Questioning them about what is and isn't racist. The whole spectacle of it was so stupid. But the point is that they have the resources and the time and the capacity to bring this and to limit the space of how we can describe what is within our right to describe, what the resistance is, right? And that's why like cases like the Riverway Law case for Hamas is so important, right? Because it was like the first time that the state was forced to confront this idea that somebody was publicly talking about Hamas using, you know, ultimately the master's tools within their own courts and saying, well, hello, actually, we think that there's an actual legal case here to deprescribe them. You know, and actually a very, very good, a very strong argument, which they didn't even respond to effectively. Like they sent like half a page letter back saying, no, we're not going to do that, right? But without giving any reasons whatsoever. And that actually exposed how there are ways in which you can do the unfathomable, right? But you just have to be brave, and you have to do it in a conscientious way. And so I think, you know, I think everybody in this room is here because they believe in that spirit of conscientiousness, right? That's what Brize Norton is really about, if we're going to like boil it down to something. And so like all of this operates in that space of we have to push back in every single space that we have, even if it's as stupid as owning the right to call somebody a coconut as a political critique, right? But like all of this is connected. All of it is connected.
Matt, going back to the research that you've, you know, kind of conducted over the last 2 years, could you give us some? I mean, I know you've already touched upon it, but could you give us some more insight into it? And then also, I think I also have a question on how important, vital, crucial surveillance is in ensuring a genocide occurs, like, the function of surveillance.
Yeah, I can answer that in a second. I just wanted to follow on for what something Asim said. So it's interesting listening to that, because from my analysis is that the prescription regime is being wielded as an attack on free speech rather than needed to give them the tools to prosecute X, Y, Z. And that's why you see in the case of Hezbollah being prescribed, it was a total Israel lobby job, and they admitted it. Stuart Polak, who's like the doyen of the Israel lobby in this country, he's a lord, a British lord, allegedly. But he was he did a speech on YouTube for some Israel lobby event, and they were talking about their current goal, which is to prescribe the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, and they've been trying that for ages and haven't done it yet. But he was asked about it, and he said, well, what we need to do is just pure lobbying. That's what we did with Hezbollah, and it worked. So, and actually in the case of Hezbollah, it was against UK national interest. Like there was a lot of resistance in the Foreign Office because Hezbollah has a political wing which has ministers in the Lebanese government, and if you're actual government which is working for the interests of your own people and your own sort of diplomatic access, etc., you don't want to prescribe an institution which has positions in government in X country. And then obviously the resistance thing is a major attack on free speech, because it's fine to not like a certain group or like a certain group, but you don't live in a free society if you can't have an opinion on these groups. It's the equivalent of like during the Vietnam War. You know, there was massive outpouring of resistance to the Vietnam War within America, and many people came out and said they supported the Viet Cong because they were resisting the brutal imperial aggression from America. The idea that you would be put in prison for that is anathema in the US. That we've allowed it here is and again, I think it is a sign that they're losing. They need to have the law because they know that if people are free to speak, they're more and more people understand what Israel is. They understand that it's the Israeli state that is the terrorist in this situation, and they need people to be scared. They need a deterrent in place to stop us speaking. And I'll just finish with this on Asim's point about us on the need to be brave. One of the things that gives you bravery and courage is to look at what the Palestinians are dealing with. Like, we have some freedoms here; they're being eroded, but we're not going to get killed for speaking out. So in that context, when you're watching journalists being murdered every day, and over 200 of them were killed, and not just killed, targeted. I think there were more journalists killed in Gaza by Israel than every conflict post-Second World War cumulatively, which is just insane. So it was obviously a genocide as well. And so when you look at that, and they're still going out to report, if we're not using the freedoms we have here, we're immoral people. Like, we have to use the freedoms we have, and yes, be clever about it. But they lead. You know, they lead in their example, their moral courage. They lead. Anything we suffer is not going to be anything on the order of what they suffer. So, and just to go to about the research, and surveillance. Well, surveillance is obviously integral. It's one of the major parts of any military operation. And interestingly, Palantir are involved. Everyone's talking about Palantir now, but it's a software that kind of aggregates intelligence, but it's involved in targeting and stuff like that with the genocide in Gaza. And they signed an agreement in January 2024, actually, a strategic partnership with the Israeli government, so 3 months into the genocide. And we don't really know what that involved, but you can imagine that they are providing targeting lists. Their software is being used to get targeted lists, and we know AI is being used to bomb Gaza. Although I've been a bit reticent about the AI thing, because I think it kind of works in the Zionist interest. I always wonder why, if an article becomes popular in the mainstream, I always wonder what service that article is providing. So there was this article in 972 magazine, which is an Israeli magazine, about this AI system called Lavender. And it was passed around, mainstream Guardian journalists, the Times would cover it. Apparently it was given to Biden in the White House. And I was like, okay, well, why would that cut through? And then I was thinking, well, it's clear why it cut through, because it says, it's got a bad kind of success rate, but the underlying assumption is that the target was Hamas or militants, when we know that's not the case. The target from the start has been civilians. You know, Netanyahu was in a secret meeting with his chief of staff. I think they said they'd hit 500 targets a couple of days in. He was like, I want double that, and they said we don't have them, or actually more than double that. Add a couple of zeros on it. He was like, and the chief of staff was like, we don't have it. He was like, just take out the houses. This is in the Israeli press. You can read it. So we know from the start they were targeting civilians. So the AI thing is, I'm sure they use AI, but the reason that article and the reason I think it's become so popular is that it does take some of the reality, it takes some of the genocide out of it, because it's like we're doing it by mistake. Not that we care. We'll give you that. We don't care enough about Palestinians, but the target is not the Palestinians when we know that it's genocide, ethnic cleansing. So it's integral. And the British, like, they have, outside of Israel, they have the best documentation of the genocide of any country in the world, because no other country was flying these surveillance flights, or at least they weren't doing it in a way we could find out. There were probably US drones, but not in this regular 6-hour routine. And it's thousands of hours of footage, thousands of hours, and they won't release it. They won't even release the footage of the day when the 3 British World Central Kitchen staff were killed, which is nuts. Jeremy Corbyn's Gaza Tribunal, the lawyer for them, their families spoke, and he said that the Starmer administration wouldn't even meet with them, meet with the families. They wouldn't release the footage. So you're talking about your own citizens getting killed by this genocidal state, and you won't even, and your plane was in the sky just before, and you won't even give the tapes to the families. Like, that is an occupied government that's not working for us. It's working for foreign interests. So it's integral, and is any court of law, as I mentioned earlier, would if Starmer and Lammy and John Healey and the previous Grant Shapps, Rishi Sunak had to get up and defend it in court, they'd be picked apart within seconds, because you can't say what they say, which is it's only for hostage rescue. That's what they've claimed, right? They say it's only for hostage rescue. It's like, how does that work? You send it in real time, and you send a little email alongside the intelligence saying, can you just not use this to bomb civilians? Just use it just to locate hostages. And the reason that was allowed to, and it's still said, by the way, without any context, and it's obvious bullshit, to be honest with you, because the video I mentioned earlier were about the flight that we eventually found because the pilot forgot to turn off his transponder. It was going around Khan Yunis for 2 hours, and that was the center of the fighting at the time between the resistance and the IOF. And then you understand why they tried to keep that flight path secret for 2 years, because even the Israeli government themselves didn't think the prisoners of war were anywhere near Khan Yunis. They thought they obviously didn't know where they were, but they thought they were in northern Gaza or central Gaza. So I think it is clear that the surveillance was part of the military campaign. And John Elmer, who's a very good journalist at Electronic Intifada, he did an analysis of that video, and he's kind of the leading expert in the English-speaking media on what's happening on the ground between the resistance and the IOF. And he said this looks like a surveillance overflight for a military operation, which we knew were happening on the ground in Khan Yunis. So. Yes, integral. But I'll finish with this, because there is an interesting question that comes out of all this, which I am asked a lot, and I still don't really have a good answer because I don't really understand it myself, which is people say, look, the Israelis have one of the most sophisticated militaries in history. They have complete control of Gaza and have done forever. Why do they need this British surveillance flight to go over 6 hours a day? What can that provide that they can't provide? And I think actually the answer lies more here than there. I think the Israelis probably don't give a toss. But we have an establishment in this country which is pickled in imperial, an idea that they have a right to run the world. And that's obviously hundreds of years old when we did run the world for 200 years. But that's still there, and it's still taught to our establishment in their private schools when they grow up, and it's this sense of entitlement. And they want to be involved in every kind of genocidal or war crime that the US or Israel is carrying out. And they probably, I'm sure Rishi Sunak or whoever it was just said, yeah, what do you need? Can we be involved? And the Israelis were like, well, we don't need it, but go for it. And it's like, that is how, as I mentioned, this is how sick our establishment is, that they give themselves to this. They're not pushed into it, even in the case of these surveillance flights. So to conclude with an answer to your question, I think that it's integral. You can't have a genocide without a surveillance regime. And Gaza's the most surveyed place on earth. It's dystopia. You know, you see that they were sending drones all through it and putting out some of the most awful shit we've ever seen. Like they put drones with fake babies crying, so people would come out of their houses and then just assassinated them. So yeah, it's horrendous, and it's happening here. I mean, I think that we're seeing a kind of Israelification of the West. Like, if you look at Iran and how Trump talks about Iran, yes, it's crazy, and yes, it's unprecedented. You know, when he said I'm going to end a civilization tonight, but who said we're going to withdraw all water, food, and electricity at the start of the genocide because we're dealing with human animals? That was the Israelis. They opened the floodgates. And that's happening there. Then you were mentioning the kangaroo courts and these legal cases. Has administrative detention where they can put people in prison without any trial or charge for indefinite periods? That's Israel. They've done it for a long time. So slowly that Israelification of Western society is happening, and a lot of it is happening on behalf of the Zionist entity as well. It's not like you can say things in this country about your own government that you can't say about Israel. How bananas is that? Same in the US. It's so crazy.
Sorry, I just wanted to quickly say goodbye and thank you to everybody. Unfortunately, I do have to leave right now. But I just wanted to give a message from Omar Khalid, who called me just before. He's one of the Brize Norton 5. Called me just before we came into this event. He wanted to give his apologies because he wanted to give a statement, but he was moved wings and they didn't give him his phone literally up until the point that he called me just before I came in here. But he did wish everybody his best and thanked you all for being here tonight and for supporting all 5 of them. All right, take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're going to open questions to the audience now. Are the mics ready for the audience? Yeah? Okay. In the interim, I just want to say, Matt, you also recently discovered there was an MCQ-9 advanced drone also like above Lebanon, and I think your sort of analysis or analysis on the fact that we just want to be involved there again. Do you think that still holds true? Do you think that the rhetoric that Starmer is putting out that we're not involved in the war doesn't hold true, and they're just like untrackable, I guess, surveillance flights that we can't track? I don't know. Yeah, well, firstly, it's like Hamza said about the whole Starmer, the whole thing that's been set now in the discourse in the mainstream is Starmer's doing well, or had a brief period of doing well because he stood up to Trump. What does standing up to Trump mean? He opened up RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire and Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean for bombing raids of. So it's so disconnected from reality what we get in the media. But in the Lebanon case, they don't even cover it. So there's 2 ways they do it. One is to just kind of form a kind of or it feeds into an ideology which is already set, which is that we are not involved in bad things and we do good around the world, and you can feed information in that. But the other way to do it is just to censor any information which doesn't fit into that narrative. So, and I actually think that's the most powerful, and I don't know if Hamza agrees with me, but I kind of came to that conclusion when I was at Declassified, because I was just like, how are they just not covering what we're doing here? And it carries on at Declassified. I know that their work now is not covered by the mainstream. And this Lebanon flight is the same thing. I was like, so I found that on April 8th, when there was this huge Israeli massacre, they hit 100 targets in 10 minutes. And I think the conservative estimate was over 300, but it might be a lot more. Anyway, so I found that this British drone had flown from RAF Akrotiri. Again,
this isn't secret information. This is any journalist in the country who actually wants to find out what the government's doing could go on this flight tracking website. You don't even need to pay. I do pay because I do some advanced, or quite advanced is pushing it a bit. I do a bit more than you can do on the free stuff, but they can do that, right? And no one did it. So I found it, and this is a MQ-9 drone, which is a weaponized drone. So it can drop paveway 2 bombs, 500-pound bombs, and it's flying over Lebanon and doing circles in East Lebanon near Baalbek, which was one of the places which was targeted, and 118 people were killed. Now, in a normal, if you're brought up believing that you have a free press and you would think like a media, some journalists in the mainstream media might be like, oh, it's quite interesting that we sent a drone over like this country that we're bombing, that is getting bombed to smithereens by Israel, in the context of the fact we've run a 2-year intelligence gathering program for Israel over Gaza, but not a single word about it has appeared in the mainstream media. It's got covered by Middle East Eye and Novara and a couple of other alternative media, but again, it goes to show the power of censorship of omission, right, and propaganda by omission. Because yes, if you read Middle East Eye and Novara, you might know that, but it's not a mass. Whereas if the BBC covered it, the whole country would know. So the BBC not covering it makes them complicit and feeds into this whole illusion of the British place in the world and role in the world, which is their job, by the way. Like they're not journalists; they're propagandists. They are literally structurally their role in our society is to keep us pummeled with disinformation and misinformation and omission. Yeah.
Hamza, did you want to respond to that as well?
Yeah, just on the sorry, do you mind just? Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, on the media, one aspect which is can't be understated is how much of the lobby has infiltrated the British mainstream media. And to give an example of like a crash course of what happened, so there was around June 2024, so about less than a year in, there was a press trip. These happen all the time. They go to Israel, but just to give a context, so BICOM, who are one of the first organisations formed in about 2000, they're the main ones for the media. And by the way, they received significant assistance from the Israeli Interior Ministry when it was formed, so direct link to Tel Aviv there. So Jonathan Cummings, who was head of BICOM's Tel Aviv office, he said it's really important in 2010, he said it's really important to insulate the elite opinion makers in the UK. And he mentioned specifically The Guardian, the Financial Times and the BBC. And he said we have to cultivate them, we've got to cultivate their views, and that's how, when we take them on trips to Israel, that's what we do. There was a leaked email in 2011 where BICOM had been boasting basically about how they made Sky News change a headline on Israel. And this happens all the time. Now, if you want a crash course of how this happens, in 2024 in June, there was a press trip, a separate organisation, not BICOM, and one of the journalists that went was a diplomatic correspondent at the Sunday Express. So he went to Israel and he spoke, he called it a special briefing with a few military chiefs and all. And he then came back a few days later, and in his column on the Sunday, he then said, I visited schools and I saw explosives at Hamas place. I saw that children's bedrooms are used for explosives, etc., control and command centers in schools, etc. Now that's basically how it works. You go on a trip, they pay for your trips, they then sell you propaganda, you come back and you regurgitate it, you sell it to the public, so that the next time a school is blown up, a hospital's targeted, children are killed, you connect the dots and you think, control and command centers, human shields, etc. And that's basically the function of the media, and the lobby's role can't be understated. They have signed up to censorship. That's their role. Their role is to amplify the wrong talking points, to conceal the reality, to sustain the smokescreen. And the role of the Israel lobby in that is remarkable. One, on an anecdotal point of view, so Sky News had a report the other day, Adam Parsons, who's the Middle East correspondent, and he was reporting in Jerusalem. And he said, Gaza's been forgotten in all of this. And let's not forget there is a ceasefire, even though Palestinians are being killed every day. Now, I'm not a linguistics expert, but if the fire isn't seen, then there's obviously not a ceasefire. I just clipped that bit and I put it up on Twitter and I said, it can't be a ceasefire then, can it? It went semi-viral. He replied and he goes, can you please identify where Israel has breached the ceasefire? He's literally told us that Israel's killing Palestinians daily. to which we then say, well, that's not a ceasefire. But they're so programmed that a ceasefire isn't the killing of Palestinians. No, it's just whatever Israel says. If Israel says it's not being violated, then it's not being violated. There's no critical thought. There's no basic journalism. We're told that this so-called free press, this ruthless holding of account and holding powers accountable, it doesn't exist. And like I said, in order to climb the grease pole in this country, you have to be subservient to Israel. So, like I said, we are captured. But the media, it can't be understated. We know that the role of the lobby, CFI, Board of Deputies, LFI, but the role of the lobby, kind of the mechanisms in the media are just indispensable. And like I said, they sign up to censorship, and then they go and tell you, oh, we're impartial and we're all the rest of it. They are, like you said, Hassan Abu Sitta, the Palestinian doctor, he said when there is a genocide museum, there'll be a special wing for the journalists. And boy, good luck to those engineers and architects, because it's going to have to be a huge wing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're going to open for questions from the audience. Carrots there. Yeah.
Okay, so as you both have talked about, there's a media ecosystem where mainstream media has mass censorship, and then obviously there's works of independent outlets like Declassified and Palestine Deep Dive, which obviously do research on the genocide and our participation in it, but have limitations of how much resources you have. Obviously, you don't have the same access to military sources that the BBC or the Guardian or the Times have. So based on the things that you've talked about today, how is it that pressure is generated to push mainstream media to report on those things? Because you've given 2 or 3 examples of times where that censorship is broken. So what's the pattern behind that? And also, can you comment on the role of Brize Norton? Obviously, one of the things that Brize Norton did was expose the role of the RAF bases. So is that also part of the pattern? And how is that a good example of how your work is translated into action by activists and the general public?
I mean, this is a really good question. I mean, I'm quite an absolutist on this, in that I'm not one who thinks that I'm not a campaigner, so I understand campaigning, you have different priorities and you should focus on the mainstream media. But as someone doing stories and investigations, I'm just not interested in working with the mainstream media, even if it might help with outreach or something, because I think that you can do it, but and you can say it won't change what I do, but it ends up changing it. You're in an ecosystem where it's just different rules apply, and it's in a very passive way, so you can't really see how it works. And I mean, when we started talking about starting Declassified UK, myself and Mark Curtis, we were very explicit at us. We were like, we're not going to work with the mainstream media. There was even an idea at one point about not even having any writers that had written for The Guardian within the last 2 months. We didn't go with that in the end because we thought it was a bit too much. But for campaigners, it's obviously different because you want to reach as many people as possible. I totally understand that. So I'm not an absolutist across different sectors. But in terms of how you get... And also, the other thing is we don't need it anymore. Like, if we lived in the old days before social media, right, we would need it. Like, I literally have never... I don't think I've... Like, since they reviewed my book badly in 2015, I've never appeared in The Guardian, right? But I managed to, alongside colleagues, we managed to really get the spy flight story quite well known about just by doing it relentlessly. I posted like a picture, like a GIF every single day for like a year and a half. And then it got out. So you can get millions of views. Like if I did one of those GIFs of the spy plane over Gaza. It got like 6 million views, and another one got 5 million views, 4 million views. That's more than papers sell in this country. So we don't need them. They need us more than we need them. We expose them by the work we do. And then the final part of your thing about what's the kind of physics of which ones get taken up by the mainstream media. I think it's just when it's become so hard to keep censoring it. Like, for example, if we hadn't got that image of the spy plane over Gaza, it wouldn't have been mentioned. But because that got like 6 million views, 5 million, they're just like, we're looking bad here. Like, how can we not cover this? And then they were eventually forced into it. And then The Guardian, The Times was the one that covered it first, and then The Guardian did one, and then the Daily Mail did one. So they kind of work in a pack as well. So once the floodgates open, it's kind of who takes the first. But to be honest, it doesn't concern me. I don't care. Like how many people are going to read that Guardian article? Not 6 million. Like, so if you want impact, and during the genocide, my perception of journalism changed. I was like, just how the hell can we get impact, rather than like how can we, and it's changed. Like that story is quite an interesting one, because I was banging my head against the wall with it for ages, and then as soon as I had that GIF, I was like, fucking Jesus Christ, this is gonna go viral. And we're kind of in a new world in that extent, like where it's the type of the media rather than the story itself is maybe more important, unfortunately. But if you're strategic about it, you can have a big impact. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would actually echo that, because it depends on consumption habits, right? So is it that you do the work so it gets picked up in the media, or is it that you push people so that they're no longer consuming it via the mainstream? So I think there's an argument that the likes of Middle East Eye, Novara, Declassified and all the rest have actually done enough where they're now seeing as fundamental sources. I reckon on October 6th, for example, I reckon if people wanted Middle East news, they'd still open a Guardian. I reckon now there's probably a decent amount of the population who would now veto that and go, let me look elsewhere. But I see the value in, obviously, like you're saying, like when you push enough, and then you need those kind of the fence sitters, I call them, the people that are, where are they? They're still looking at the BBC, people that are watching News at Night at the end of the evening to gauge and to understand. Then yeah, you kind of do need things to be picked up on so that you can shift the dial a little bit. So I guess there's merits in both, but I think what's more important is probably lifestyle changes in terms of when it comes to media, how we consume media, and so we get to the point where the impact is without, even if the Guardian, the Times, the Telegraph don't pick it up, there is still maximum impact. And then if they do pick it up, that's because of the pressure generated. So I feel like I think we're past the point of waiting for them, because they've proven that they're incapable. They've proven they haven't risen to the responsibility. But there is enough noise now coming from the other outlets that we can generate enough noise, enough momentum. But I agree that they are awful, but I think there's enough people that are probably still need to be swayed. And then I still speak to people who read The Guardian, and I know I don't want to sound like a broken record of The Guardian, but people still say, but they've got like 2 good columnists. They do. The columnists are, there's a few that do a decent job, but that's not enough of a reason to you just got to ditch it. You got to boycott. And when you read it on the archive. So archive it once and put it onto the archive website. And when you read it, they don't get views. Because you can't open a Guardian article without them begging for money now, and that's got to be for a reason, right? They're losing that self-sufficiency, and it's just about kind of going to the next step in severing the ties with them. But again, I caveat that, like Matt said, where maybe journalists have a different perspective than a campaigner. Sometimes you do need a story to go to a particular outlet, so it generates more momentum. But I think once we change that completely, and they're almost obsolete, then I think that's also the next step.
That's when they'll shut down the free press, or that's when they'll pass laws. Yeah. Like, it's true that once you get to a certain level of influence, that's when they really care. That's why they put Julian Assange in Belmarsh, because he has having a massive impact in the mainstream. I just wanted to I forgot to answer something that you made an important point, which I didn't mention, which is like about the access. Because yes, it is true that some stories do need people with sources inside different institutions, and that that is an important part of it. But again, that's partly why it's such a captured system, because access journalism only allows you to go as far as you can without losing that access. So I've talked to journalists before who say it's a bit like playing a violin. You have to find the little spaces where you could, like the Times journalist, she would lose if she wrote a really truthful, I'm not saying it has to be polemical, but if she just wrote a truthful news report with all the facts that we've mentioned throughout this, then she probably would lose the access, because she'll be like, right, this woman actually doesn't want Britain to have global power, whatever it is. But so she has. There were about 4 or 5 lines in there that were really revelatory, but they were couched in the usual kind of thing. But and there are some good journalists, despite it being who know that the constraints that exist and try and work within them. They're few and far between, but they do exist. And it's just a choice you got to make. It was one I knew early on that I didn't want to make that bargain with the devil, really, because the other thing is, especially with the internet, man, you can find all these stories. Like most of the stories I did it declassified and still do like open source stuff. I don't need. I never had an insider from the MOD about these spy flights. I did it all from open source stuff, and that's the power of the internet, man. And that, yeah.
Yeah, the BBC reported on the hunger strikes on day 39 evening. So screw the BBC, cancel your TV licenses. And next question.
Sorry? Can I add to what these two gentlemen said?
Yeah, go for it, Miss Anne. Yeah, absolutely.
Just I was triggered, and on the note of social media, I think it's really important to understand that, as it's already been said, that mainstream media is, in terms of, if you look at the consumption and data points, it is dead. It's just that they don't quite realize it. And if you look at America, an example, and you see what, my God, and there's a spectrum from Amy Goodwin's work in Democracy Now! For decades to what Mehdi Hassan is doing with Zoteo, to Greystone, to Intercept, to they all do very different things, drop site news, and people like Hassan Piker. There is a massive exponential explosion of not just growth but trust from folks that have woken up in the last 2.5 years, and that's traveling at pace through everything from Declassified, what Matt's doing, Double Down News, Navarro Media. It's not going down or even leveling, it's just exploding. But it's our job. They're giving us a baton, and I think by doing collab posts, sharing in WhatsApp groups with friends, it's just exponentially growing in that way. And we have to recognize that. The numbers you're talking about, honestly, there are single people that speak about Palestine or Sudan or Congo or Iran that reach more than some of the newspapers of record. And that's what's happening.
Thank you. We only have time for one more question, and then we have to go to the prisoners have recorded a statement, and then we, basically want to get to that.
Really quick one.
Yeah.
Clarification. Matt, was it SBS or sorry? Just a really quick clarification, Matt. Was it the Special Boat Service or the SAS that was on the ground in Gaza, Palestine, Israel? Or both?
It was the SAS, but they weren't on the ground in Gaza. They were sent to RAF at Kretiri for Gaza operations, and that's the last we heard, because the D notice was sent out soon after. So it was the SAS, but it might be the SBS as well. But
yeah, okay.
What is the SBS?
Special Boat Service. There's the two different arms of the Special Forces. But it's interesting, the Special Forces, it's the most secret part of the British state.
Yeah.
You cannot get a single bit of information about anything. It's even more secretive than the intelligence agencies. You can get more about MI6, MI5. Special Forces is like the private, like secret arm of the British establishment, and they fought over 7 secret wars that we don't even know about since in the last 15 years. Yemen, Syria, Somalia. It's madness.
I guess we have time for one more quick question. Back there, and then we can go. I'm so sorry if I haven't taken any from the balcony.
Hi. Sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah. I just wanted to sort of bring it back here and a bit to the movement while still sort of centering Palestine. And what we've seen recently is, particularly when stuff kicked off with Iran, mass protests were erupting across Syria, Jordan, Qatar, in Palestine. And particularly these protests caught wind when the Israeli death penalty law was passed, which puts all of the Palestinian hostages in Israeli jails at deep risk. And given that also regional pressure was a factor, particularly in the Middle East, in the recent small ceasefire. I don't like the word ceasefire, but ceasefire. So I'm just wondering, how do you think that we can connect this global and international resistance movement to building abolition solidarity between the prisoners in Palestine facing this execution and also the Brize Norton 5 who are fighting these bogus charges.
Thank you. Who wants to take this one?
Hamza wants to take.
Hamza. It's a tough question.
It's quite a tough question. I think just know we're short for time. I know that in a general sense, I think there's definitely been a recognition of, partly down to social media, that this is not a fight consigned to one country. And I think when there was the people that stopped the docks when they boycotted, right, and they stopped certain things going to Israel and whatnot, that was a recognition that from what's being found out here is then imparted, and it's like, how can we? Everyone has tools in their disposal, right? And it's how can we best do that? And whether it's protest, whatever the case might be, whatever the cause, I think there's an aspect where it's not. It's one fight, but everybody is within their borders can play a different part. And like you said, we can bypass borders via social media. Messaging can go out there, and you see that with the flotilla. You see that with all different aspects. It's not one particular. It's not a thing anymore where it's like, oh, this is happening somewhere in the Middle East. I can't impact it. You can always impact it because the ways of communicating that has changed, and there's so many ways. Like I said, when that bill was passed by the Israelis, immediately everybody around the world was party to it. We recognised the importance of it. We recognised just how devastating it was. And then everybody then kind of goes back to the drawing board. How can we maximise impact? And that looks different in Spain to how it looks here, and it looks different in the Middle East. But it's about recognition that this is a kind of a unified approach. And, you know, there may be ways, like you said, journalists have a role, campaigners have a role, journalists across borders have a role, campaigners across borders. So it's all, I think it's all about recognising the tools at our disposal and how we can make it a unified aspect. I'm not sure if I answered that, but that's hopefully goes some way to.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I don't really have much to add, to be honest, but I mean, that was eloquently said. I mean, one of the interesting things that I found about the prisoners was quite profound was during the exchanges with the Israelis, with the prisoners of war in Gaza, because Zionism and the Zionists have been trying to separate the Palestinians and divide them up since the start of the project, right? And I've got a lot of friends from Gaza, and the idea that they would ever go to the West Bank, I didn't understand that never happens. They're never allowed to go to the other part of Palestine, and they're two very different societies culturally, and so they want that, and they don't want to because they want to erase the idea that Palestine exists even as an idea. But yet those prisoners of war that the Hamas held in Gaza, they were released to the Israelis in exchange for hostages, Palestinian hostages, which were held in Israel. So it was this quite a profound connection that these were people that would never probably have met, you know, but it showed how, like, the Palestine, how strong it is. That there wasn't anyone from Gaza, or there might have been a few from Gaza, but mainly it was from the West Bank. So, and then it goes to here as well, you know, the prisoners, the Brize Norton prisoners they're connected to a struggle that I don't think any of them are from a Palestinian, right? But that's sort of very profound for me to see that people are willing to risk prison and worse because, you know, I can't remember his name. There's some reform guy or restore who said that they should have been shot on sight after that Brize Norton action. But anyway, these are people that are grown up in this country, I think, most of them, and they've got no connection, but they have a sense that they need to do something, and that is allegedly do something. And for me, it's like that is. I think that's the purest essence of love, in a weird way, like to completely selflessly do something for people they don't know people in Gaza, but so. And you know, I'll just finish with this. We talked about the British establishment, the media, the political class. They do not understand that. These people are, as I said, scum. I'll use the word again. They're scum, but they're also they're immoral. They've got to their position because they don't see life as about causes. They don't see life as about empathy. They don't see life as about making the world a better place or supporting people who are vulnerable, or they see their role as getting as high as they can into a position. So they can't understand it. They literally can't understand it. That's why it was, sorry, I shouldn't mention this because it's a bit of a diversion, but that's why I found Jeremy Corbyn quite interesting. And I know it didn't end well. But like, and some people don't agree with this politically and on certain issues. But everyone, I think, can agree that he's a decent person, right? And that was so rare, just to see a decent person amongst this viper's nest in Parliament and Westminster. And they literally, I remember they would talk about him. The way they talked about him was like he was an alien. They couldn't understand who this guy was. Like, how can you? Because they've grown up in a different world. And I think that the Palestinian solidarity movement, the Brize Norton case, but also the other Palestine Action activists, they've really shown. They've set the moral bar for all of us, you know, in what you should do when your state's committing genocide. I mean, I'm not criticizing anyone, including myself, for not taking that action, but really they set the moral bar, and they took the action that any moral human being should take to try and stop a crime of such obscenity.
Thank you so much for like this conversation. Oh, I'm so sorry, but we have to listen to the prisoner's statements now. Okay, is it a quick one? Okay, fine, go for it. Go for it.
My question is about the prisoners history trial.
Yeah.
I think it's not been talked about enough in the media. But there being a gag order, what can you do actually to question and get awareness about how this whole thing has been set up?
I think we can't discuss the trial at all because of contempt of court, like at all. So I think I can't really take that question. I'm so sorry. Right. So we have statements from 3 of the Brize Norton 5 prisoners, Dan, Umar, and John. Umar's statement was recorded before his arrest, and we're going to play it for you now. Hopefully, someone is.
Today I saw 7-year-old Sidra hanging from a wall. Is it normal to see little girls ripped to shreds? Since when? I think that was my call, and
this is Umar, by the way.
336 days since then. I never felt so powerless. Did we ask to live in a country that facilitates genocide? And I realized the call to action is one that we can't suppress. So I stopped trying to hide. And to my comrades in arms, I'm proud. My friend Bryn sits in a prison cell as we speak, a kind and pure soul. As we laugh and cry with our families and friends, Bryn and 21 others sit in cells. For slamming the brakes on genocide, this is a man committed to charity, truth, justice, and freedom for all. Him and 21 others, they are our resistance. How peaceful it must be to be in those cells, knowing that you said no to genocide, no to Elbit, no to complicity. You said not in our name and not on our soil. To my comrades in arms, I'm proud. And I see Dr. Hassan Abu Safia marching towards the tank, unbowed, unbent, unbroken. If they did it, so too can we. We can stop these merchants of death. We can resist. And I remember Dr. Arnel al-Bush, tortured, raped to death. And I remember only months ago, a Palestinian hostage raped to death by Israeli soldiers on CCTV, and dozens of hostages tortured to death. For what? For the crime of being Palestinian. And I call them hostages because to call them prisoners would be dishonest. And that's why I know our comrades in this country are at peace and are steadfast. Because they know the reality of their Palestinian counterparts, and they ask themselves, what do we really have to lose? And how much would we be losing if we don't take action, if we don't resist? And they know the fight continues. They know we won't stop till we shut Albert down. They know we won't leave until they do. And to my comrades in arms, I'm proud. This genocide has been live streamed. The burden of proof has fell on the very men, women, and children being massacred. And when they ask us in Gaza, when they ask us, where are the people of humanity? We can at least say, we are here.
There is a multifaceted nature to our case, as there is to any battle between the truth and injustice, especially when they are waged within legal spheres. Political life always contains multitudes. We are acting within a world that we want to not be or want it to be different. This creates tension between what is and what could be. The present reality being as real as the desire for something else. The gap between them growing ever larger. Our task still remains to strive to bring them closer to eventually becoming one. Keep the possibilities of an otherwise present in all our actions, while not ignoring the conditions of the now. This is not an easy task. However, only by taking the gloom of the present as seriously as the hope that resistance brings, can we begin to untangle our way out of a reality that only serves the interests of capital and empire. There is a contradiction inherent to political repression. In other words, the cell that surrounds my entire existence is as real as are the opportunities to turn repression on itself. The material effects of incarceration, surveillance, or policing are too grave to be brushed over. Political repression must be taken seriously because the harm that it inflicts is serious. If we bury it under romanticized notions of the strong revolutionary whose political convictions can always keep them far above the prison or the police cell, we risk the spreading of silent fear through our communities. For no one can live to that kind of absolute fearlessness. Similarly, discipline, in the hands of the individual, isn't always enough to push the impact of violence and repression away from our bodies, our minds, and from the realm of our collective imagination. The Zionist occupying force has recently passed a law legalizing the death penalty. The mandatory death sentence only applies to convictions passed by the military courts and thus affects solely Palestinian prisoners. The colonial judicial system codified apartheid and genocide even deeper into its foundations. This should not come as a surprise to anyone. As horrific as the prospect of yet another method of ethnic cleansing is, the fact that the occupying power will now be able to enact court-sanctioned executions only further proves that Palestinians were never able to rely on the law as a force for justice. It has always been yet another tool deployed to protect the colonizer and terrorize the indigenous population. This framing is not an invitation to give in to the oppressor's escalatory tactics. On the contrary, it uncovers the range of strategies that are necessary to break the brutality of Zionism. Repression enacted through the law can only be combated by means that go far beyond the court. While the degree of brutality is not comparable in the slightest, British law was also codified with specific class and racial interests in mind. Throughout the months in prison, I have met many women who have been labeled as criminals because of poverty and daring to attempt to survive in a system that positions them outside of the mainstream understanding of productivity and therefore makes them surplus to a capitalist system. They are the ones supposedly causing harm, while war criminals are rewarded with ever-increasing opportunities that war and imperialism offers to them. The law was never meant to serve those acting against the status quo or those already disenfranchised. Therefore, we must reclaim our case from the legal sphere, which, however important, can never be our only battlefield. Our ability to appropriate the state counterinsurgency operation is, in fact, evident today in this room. It is not a product of our naivety or blindness to the mind of the systems that we're up against. The strength of our movement lies in our collective awareness of those systems, contradicted by our ability to use repression as a unifying force, an opportunity to charge back and expose the real crimes committed in this country and overseas. If repression was ever meant to pacify, it is doing the opposite. By deploying a full arsenal of their powers against the threat to national security in the form of 2 people on e-scooters and a couple liters of planes, the war machine appears everything but strong. They show us how little is needed to make a dent in the carefully orchestrated military operations and the weapons trade adjacent to them. Western imperialism relies on pacified domestic populations, on a disconnect between what happens here on British soil and the violence inflicted upon lands and populations whose extermination or control the West desires. The injustice we are facing is not surprising, but it is wrong, and can only be combated by continuing to move forward, by collective bravery and truth. So thank you all for fighting for us, fighting with us, and expanding the fight far beyond us. Free Palestine and shut down the imperial war machine.
That was John.
Speech is a privilege, powerful and liberating to use when we commit and say it loud.
Say it clear and say it loud.
Dan, you make us proud.
Dan, you make us proud.
Say it clear and say it loud.
Say it clear and say it loud.
Amu, you make us proud.
Amu, you make us proud.
Say it clear and say it loud.
Say it clear and say it loud.
Louis, you make us proud.
Louis, you make us proud.
Say it clear and say it loud.
Say it clear and say it loud.
Lord, you make us proud.
Lord, you make us proud.
Say it clear and say it loud.
Say it clear and say it loud.
Omar, you make us proud.
Omar, you make us proud.
We the Brize Norton 5.
We the Brize Norton 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
We the Brize Norton 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
We the Brize Norton 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
We the Brize Norton 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 5.
We have the venue for 15 more minutes, so definitely go upstairs and check out the zine and the merch, and have a good evening.
Please don't leave us anything to take home. We want it in the world. Just take it. It doesn't matter about the money. Take everything from upstairs and share it around. If everybody leaves with at least several zines, that's good.
Sorry, before everyone gets up, can I just say the next action for the Brize Norton 5, it will take place on the 1st of May. They have a bail hearing, which we're obviously all crossing everything for a successful bail application for the Brize Norton 5, but it's really important that we're outside the court to show our support to the Brize Norton 5, and also that we show the court that we are not intimidated by their colonial legal processes, and I can't even call it a process because it isn't that. But it's lovely that we're all sat here, and it's been such a lovely evening, and we need to be out on the street for our political prisoners. So we will be outside the Old Bailey on the 1st of May, and we will make as much noise as we can for our political prisoners who deserve us all out there, come rain, come shine, because they are the resistance, we are the resistance. Free the Brize Norton 5.
Also, on the same day, we all heard about the Quayside 3. They're having a bail hearing in the same day. They have a court on the 1st of May, so it's in the same with the Brize Norton 5. So please make sure that you message all of your friends and that you show up for the Brize Norton 5 and the Quayside 3. Free them all. The t-shirts are on the top floor. So there's 2 floors. The t-shirts are on the top floor. Thank you.
Those speeches at the end, that's great, man. Those speeches.
Have terrorism added to their case.